Hello everybody, welcome back to English Champion. On this episode, I'm going to cover the curious case of Jason Arday that has swept the world of academia the last week or two. But I'm going to approach this in a slightly different way, hopefully, than what other people have been talking about. So I hope there's something unique and interesting and of value for you here over the next few minutes. The way that everyone else has been approaching this, the loudest arguments about his case are regarding the DEI stuff. That here's a concrete example of a guy who clearly reached heights in his career that he should not have reached. And the way he did so was because the culture is kind of propping up through these policies of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of prioritizing people based on their skin color or their background rather than on their merit, on their scholarship, on their competence, and in this case, as a professor. So he has, people have been saying that he has made his way to the top, professor at Cambridge, one of the best universities in the world, in a way that is undeserved, and he was only put there because of his race and background. That's what other people have been saying. I'm going to ignore all of that, all right? I'm going to pretend that that argument doesn't exist, and instead I'm going to say the same result, us finding out how insane this is, still should have happened. And best case scenario, this would have never happened, regardless of anything related to race, ethnicity, background, any of that stuff. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this purely from a scholarship standpoint. And I'm not going to go too far into it, but I'm just going to point out that this should have been nipped in the bud a long time ago. We should have never gotten to this point. All right. The way I've done this is in hearing about the story, I kind of heard superficial mentionings of this case. I didn't really think much of it. After all, we've had a variety of other cases regarding plagiarism and people, misrepresenting themselves on their resumes or whatever, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, especially at some high-profile universities. So I didn't really think much of it. I thought, oh, here's just another case of this. And then people kept talking about it and how this story was weirder than others because of his personal story. And so I started to just read about it. And on his Wikipedia page, there is his dissertation for his PhD. So I thought, well, let me see what this guy was trying to do. So again, I'm not approaching this from a DEI situation. I don't care about the race stuff, whatever. I'm not even approaching this from his own personal, fantastical life story that he clearly has just made up. I'm not even going to look at this from a plagiarism standpoint, which has been the other angle that people have, that he was kind of found out. Nathan Kaufness was kind of the lead on this. He has a great piece on Substack that goes section, not section by section, but includes many sections that he was able to identify as being plagiarized. I'm not even going to focus on that. All right. So no DEI, no plagiarism, nothing about his personal history. I'm just looking at this dissertation and what I discovered upon giving it a good skim, a fairly thorough read, but I didn't read all of it because it's 400 pages long of mostly nonsense. So reading chunks of this, I was like, oh, this should have never have happened. There's no way this gentleman should have ever gotten to this stage of the PhD process, much less being appointed professor at such a prestigious university. And so my big argument here is this guy's PhD work. I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, but I'm not kidding here. His dissertation would not have made it out of my freshman level research, writing, and composition course at the college level. All right. Maybe I would have been generous and allowed it to have a D at best. All right. But there's a good chance that this project would not have passed my class at the freshman basic level of college, much less the PhD level of college. All right. That's how bad his project is. That is not hyperbolic. That is based on how I've been a teacher for, teaching research writing for whatever I did, 15 years or more at the college level. And so teaching thousands of students in however many dozens of courses that was over that time, this project would not have survived my scrutiny in that class. And yet he got a PhD from it. So I just wanted to mention how I would come to that, analysis of his work. And so I opened up his file, which is available online for anyone to read. And as other people have pointed out, there's a grammatical problem in the title itself. So how he didn't catch this, or how his advisors on his committee didn't catch this, I'm going to talk about that at the end of this episode. But there's a problem right from the title of the piece. But you encounter the other problems very quickly. So even before we get to the actual dissertation, where he gets into his research and his thesis, his acknowledgments pages, all right, this goes on for about 2.5 pages. And he has this, other people have mentioned this too, but his, he references Nelson Mandela. And he goes on for 2 pages about the feelings and the dream and this, this uphill climb he's had. And I noticed right from the beginning, in the very first paragraph, there's grammar errors everywhere. Just the acknowledgments are littered with grammatical errors. And so I was like, whoa, wait a minute, something is horribly wrong here. And yes, I'm an English professor, and that's what my PhD is in. And so I'm extra picky about language and grammar and spelling and all those things. But again, this is the PhD level, and this stuff is supposed to be ironed out, because these are supposed to be the best and the brightest. This is supposed to be the smartest people in the culture. And he has major problems, even before we've gotten into the truly academic parts of his paper. He has huge problems with even communicating properly. And cynics might say, well, you're focusing on this obsession with grammar and proper writing from your, privileged lens, let's say, okay? It's like, no. He's purposefully trying to sound academic. So it's not like he's using his own linguistic style here, and me, the stuffy old white guy, just can't be hip to his personal language that he has the right to use. No. He's attempting to incorporate himself into the academy. He's using academic language, not well, but he's trying to do that. So this isn't me judging his personal dialect or any of that kind of stuff. He presents himself in a scholarly way. So it's my job as a scholar to assess it in a scholarly way. And in the basics of scholarship, meaning clarity of basic sentence and paragraph structure, he cannot do it. There are grammar errors everywhere. I said, we haven't even gotten out of the acknowledgments yet. Just not to pick on him too much, because again, I'm trying to look at this just from a piece of scholarship, but like just the last sentence of his acknowledgement, he talks about humility and belief and faith and all things being possible. And the last line is, the long road has not ended. It has just began. No, it's just begun. First of all, it's a run-on, because those are 2 sentences. But it should be has begun. So he doesn't know how to conjugate verbs properly, even. So even before I got to the actual academic work here, I was already like, whoa, this is a huge problem. How was this not fixed? The title of it, when you open the file, is final version. So like, this isn't like, oh, he accidentally uploaded his early draft and he just hasn't gone through the typos yet. No, this is final draft. Just like mine, when I have mine labeled in my files, and I have various iterations, and the one that says final draft, that's the one I defended and submitted for publication at the university and all that. So his is also final draft, and it's littered with problems. Just as another point of silliness, included in this, he has a little message for his children. I'm assuming that's who these are. There's a grammar error in the little passage here, but it's like including music lyrics from Jimi Hendrix and AC/DC. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. Like, I understand in the acknowledgments you're allowed to have a little bit of your personality show, but like, if I were the advisor on this, I would have said, well, why is this in here? What are you doing this for? Let's get to the scholarship. There's 400 pages here. Let's get this thing moving. I don't need 2.5 pages of your acknowledgments. Just as a comparison, in my acknowledgments for my PhD, it's this long. It's one short paragraph, and I acknowledge my advisors who sat on my committee. I thank them for that. I acknowledge a couple other scholars who were very kind to me during my research process. I reached out to them, at different universities, and they actually helped me. I acknowledge my parents and my wife for being so supportive. That's it. In one short paragraph, it's like 8 lines. Done. Let's get on to the scholarship, because that's what we're all here for. It's like, this dude goes on for 2.5 pages with acknowledgments. It's so weird. So I finally get to the introduction of the dissertation. And again, I can tell immediately that this has major problems. Again, the grammar errors are everywhere. But beyond that, from a research standpoint, and why this wouldn't work even in my own class, the premise of his study, if you want to call it that, it's not really a study. The premise of his idea here is that he believes that during the teacher education process, so like especially during student teaching, which is what we call it here in America, and even in the beginning of your career, the best way to help develop these young teachers, because they're brand new out of school, they don't know a lot, they're still learning, even though they have their degree. Teaching is something you constantly adapt and learn. So fair enough. But his idea here is that it should be done among peers. That the old way of having a mentor teacher, someone who's been doing this a long time, should observe you, should offer you feedback, should offer you an opportunity to ask questions and discuss things, and with your wisdom, the older teacher's wisdom and experience, can kind of guide that student into becoming a professional teacher. He says that old way relies too much on a power dynamic, and it'd be better if students who are attempting to become teachers talked to each other. Couple things. First of all, that idea of peers talking to one another during this process has been around forever. I was in my education program 26 years ago, all right? And every Wednesday, we would get together after we taught at our schools, respective schools. All of us would come back to the university and gather in a big room, and there would be a time where we would talk to each other, either in a small group or as partners or something. We say like, oh, what's working with you? What have you struggled with lately? Like, peer discussion about how things are going is normal. That's what's been happening forever. Okay. It's very common for people to exchange their experiences and all that stuff. So this idea is not new. But he goes a step further and says, well, this should be what really pushes the learning process, the development process. And he calls it peer mentoring. Okay, well, the word mentor, I was just like, am I thinking of this word differently than he is? Because I was like, well, what should we be talking about here? The word mentor literally means an experienced and trusted advisor. All right. Other definitions: someone who gives help and advice to a less experienced and often younger person, a wise and trusted counselor or teacher, a person who gives help and advice to someone with less experience, especially in a job or at school. So it's always about someone older, wiser, more experienced, has sufficient kind of broad understanding as well as specific skills in this field, in this case, teaching. And that's who you're learning from. That's who's guiding you on this process. But he says, no, you can do this among peers. It's like, well, that's not a mentor. Those are buddies. Those are peer groups, I guess, partnerships, but they're not mentoring. And so just from a definition standpoint, what he's describing here doesn't really make sense. And what it is, as I was thinking about it, I was like, I've mentioned the absurdity of turn and talk, why that's such a dumb idea in schools. This is turn and talk. His idea is turn and talk for adults. All right. And as I said with young kids, the same problem would occur here because we're still in an academic environment or a school environment where, okay, best case scenario, you put two student teachers together, and best case scenario, they're both very smart. They have lots of background knowledge, both in their subject area and in pedagogy, and they're very willing and open to discuss ways of improving, and they both can generate really good ideas that maybe the other hadn't thought of yet, even though they're really smart. And they're wanting to do that, and they both benefit from it. Best case scenario, all right? That's pretty rare because a lot of times, as I said with younger kids, once you get two smart kids together, most of the time they go, yeah, I'm doing fine. Sounds like you're doing fine. Okay, we're done. Like, I don't need your advice because mine's going well. Sounds like yours is going well. So we don't need to have a chat here. All right. This best case scenario, not to be gender stereotyping here, but probably works best among females. They kind of like that sharing process and hearing other people's ideas. So, okay, maybe that works with them. But that assumes that both people are both really bright and both have good ideas that they actually want to share and want to receive. There's not many students who are actually like that at the low level or the higher level. As I said in a previous episode with kids at a low level, yeah, if you have two smart kids together, they go, yeah, I already know what we're doing here, so I don't need to talk about it. Like, come on, teacher, let's keep the class moving. Why are we doing this chit chat stuff? We already know this stuff, so let's keep doing. Let's go to the next thing. So that's what will happen here. Another situation in this scenario, but also with little kids, is, well, what if one student is really bright and the other is not? What happens then? Well, the less capable student isn't going to be offering anything of value to the upper level student, and so like the top student isn't getting anything out of this, and the top student's looking at the lower level student, even if they are very kind and generous and actually want to help them. They could also be looking and going, well, I already know all this stuff. Why don't you know it? I've been sitting here learning and practicing and doing all my work. You haven't been. And so now you're struggling and you're asking me for advice. You figure it out. Or go ask the teacher, but it's not my job to help you. That's what happens when you pair top students with lower students. That's something that happens. Or worst case scenario, which again I talked about with Turn and Talk. Let's say you pair two students who aren't very good at this teaching thing. Because after all, just like the old joke about doctors, like, what do you call a guy who got a C in medical school? You call him doctor. The same thing happens with teachers. What do you call a guy who had a 1.8 GPA in his education program? Well, you call him a teacher. Like, there's bad teachers everywhere. Well, when you put two bad teachers or student teachers together and say, oh, teach each other, mentor each other about how you can become a better teacher, like, what are they going to offer? They can offer what they've been going through, but the other person's going to have just as bad ideas as him. So how does this help anybody? So this is what happens again with Turn and Talk. Like, who's monitoring this? Where's the mentor in this? You can't just have kids, whether they're 8 years old or 20 years old, let's just talk about it. Let's do some reflection. Reflection about what? You don't know anything. The whole point of this is you don't know enough. And so you need someone smarter to come along and guide you on this process. That's what a mentor teacher has traditionally done. But his thesis is, no, that incorporates too much of a power dynamic. You might not feel comfortable talking to your mentor teacher. And so having a peer would make it much more comfortable, and you can actually learn more that way. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. And again, that doesn't even align with the word mentor. So like I said, not to rehash old ideas, but his idea is Turn and Talk for adults, which is dumb. All right. It's dumb for 8-year-olds, dumb for 20-year-olds. Stop it. There needs to be a teacher guiding this, or at least a good tutor. That's where the research actually comes in on this, is you need someone who's substantially better at this than the students themselves. When they're all just peers, well, then there's no peer mentoring going on. You can't mentor someone that you're at the same level as they are. You can share, and that's good. Again, I'm not against kids talking to each other in class, but just don't think that they're getting much out of it. They can share their experience, and it's interesting to hear what other people are going through. But if the goal, as he lays out in his dissertation, is for the students, as they become, moving from the university world into the professional world, that they actually improve and develop, well, that's not what happens here. That's ridiculous. You need someone smarter to guide you, someone more experienced and wiser. That's what a mentor teacher is for. He also says, and again, I knew this immediately because in his opening lines, he talks about purposive sampling. All right. Now, is this the worst thing in the world? Not necessarily. Research is often done where you purposefully pick people to be included in your research study. But it really signaled alarm bells for me. And then when I heard other people talking about his other publications, I was like, oh, what he's doing here, he just found a couple people who would automatically want to be a part of what he's doing and who are going to prove what he set out to prove from the beginning. So he's not doing any real experiment here. He just went and found a few people, said, here's what I want to accomplish. I want to demonstrate that peer mentoring in the student teaching process is really good for the students, and they really enjoy it and they learn a lot from it. Can you do that? Oh, yeah, sure. That sounds like what something I would like to have happen. And so they go into it already knowing what the results are going to be, and they just confirm those. All right. So he purposely picked students who would go along with what he already wants to accomplish. There's no randomizing. There's no control. There's no point of comparison other than his comparison to the previous research about traditional mentoring, teacher mentoring. But like his actual experiment has no comparison within itself. So it's a bad study. All right. It kind of just resorts to, well, here's what people did and here's what people said. That's all it is. There's nothing being proven here. The worst part of his sampling is there's only 4 students that he looks at or talks to. 4. Again, this is why I could never pass my own class. In my research writing classes, we don't just do secondary research, where yes, we learn how to use the library, we learn how to use things properly from the internet, we learn how to cite and all of that stuff. That's the secondary research stuff. But I also introduce primary research because I want them to be prepared in whatever class they go into. If a teacher ever says, I want you to conduct your own research on this topic, I want them to have been introduced to it. So we don't always complete a full project with it, but we work on it as a proposal. So you have to outline what your plan is and how you would go about doing it and what you would hope to discover. That's what a proposal does, using a primary research methodology. And so we practice this with my 19-year-olds. If any of my students ever came to me and said, well, I'd want to talk to 4 people, I would say, no, that's not enough. That's too small a sample size. If you're going to make some claim at the end of this, which is what the whole point of research is that you come to some sort of argumentative, persuasive thesis statement, well, you can't prove anything by just talking to 4 people. So we need a larger sample size here. And yet somehow he got this published as a dissertation with his committee by talking to 4 people. That's crazy. They should have said, because he outlines, well, here's how it happened. I started with about 50 and some people couldn't do it and other people, there was problems. And so it came down to 4. If I was on that committee, I would have said, then you better start over and find more people, because we can't do a project where you're just assessing 4 people and then making some claim about it. That's ridiculous. And yet these folks let him do it. So, there's a problem with his grammar, as I talked about. There's a problem with his terminology. There's a problem with his sampling and who he's exactly examining here. And then there's also, he calls it a phenomenological analysis, which again is fine. That is part of primary research, where you either interview people, you do surveys, you get responses from your participants. Nothing wrong with that. Except what he is always aiming to do, and what he ended up doing with his other research, is it's all about lived experience. It's all about, what's your interpretation of this? Again, it's not rooted in any factual analysis. He just does it and goes, well, what did you think? Did this help? Yeah, it helped. Oh, I guess that proves it then. So there's no real data collection here. It's just, tell me what you think, and worse yet, tell me what you feel about this process. It's like, well, that's not great evidence. Again, we do that sometimes. That is primary research, where we get people's reactions. But you have to go much further than that. What he needs to do, again, there's no control group here where they don't know what's going on and they're just going through the standard process. And there's no end result metric or evaluation where we can actually judge, compared to the control or compared to this other group, this thing they did is measurably better. Here's how I know. I observed these things. I saw them incorporate this in a class. You actually outline a metric so that we can measure, yes, this group did better than this group at this thing that I'm analyzing, which is improvement in the student teaching process. He never does that. He just says, well, I wondered if this was good. I asked students who already thought it would be good to go ahead and do it, and then just tell me how good it was. And ta-da, I proved how good it was. Like, no, the whole process is bad. Okay? If you're going to do this phenomenological analysis, you need to go much deeper into the statistical understanding of this too. You can't just leave it by itself. That's not enough. There needs to be, like I said, an evaluative metric that we can actually judge this on. He doesn't do any of it. So there's all sorts of flaws with the very premise of what he's doing. And then, like I said, once you actually start reading this, we see just how unscientific this is. And we see how poorly it's written. I'm not joking. He doesn't understand how to use punctuation. As the title demonstrates, he doesn't know how apostrophes are used. He makes apostrophe mistakes throughout the entire document. He has fragments and run-ons throughout. He doesn't know how to use other forms of punctuation either, the fragments and run-ons. That would have to do with periods and commas. He has no clue about how to use commas. There's many passages where I'm like, why do you have commas there? And I'm someone who uses a lot of commas. He has commas in places that make no logical sense. Semicolons and colons. Like, he'll just drop it into a paragraph. You're like, well, that doesn't need to be there. Why are you using that? So punctuation, basic sentence structure. Like I said, there's some fragments and run-ons. Flow between paragraphs. Like, you'll be reading about one concept and he'll jump to something else. You're like, wait a minute, what's the connection between these two things? Within a paragraph, he does this a lot where he'll cover 4 or 5 things, and then the last sentence will be like, this demonstrates yada yada. It's like, well, what does this mean? You discussed like 4 things above. So when you say this, which one of those are you referring to? So there's a lot of antecedent problems where he just assumes the reader is going to understand what he says, and it's very confusing. So there's just lots of structural, grammatical, technical problems from a writing standpoint, on top of all of the methodological problems that lead one to believe, who has any experience with research, with just logic and how science works, where you go, yeah, this isn't a good idea. We need a lot more here of what you're going to attempt to study, because this plan you have isn't a good one. Not only did they let him pursue the plan, they actually let him complete it and gave him a PhD for it. So it's just overall, it's just a massive disaster. Again, I didn't read all 400 pages. I read the introduction. I went a bit further into the lit review section, and then I kind of jumped ahead and spot checked some other places to see if the things I was seeing were continuing throughout. Like, is the grammar this bad everywhere? And sure enough, it is. Is his flawed argument this bad everywhere? Sure enough, it is. So then, I moved to the actual study component, to the findings component, to the conclusion, to the discussion part where he includes the responses of his people he's analyzing. Again, there's only 4 people, and they take up pages and pages and pages. So he's using this to beef up the length of his project and make it look more scholarly by including so many pages of reporting from his subjects that really don't matter that much. But he just includes all of it to make his work look more substantial. So again, the whole point of this is that I don't care what color skin this dude has. I don't care what his background is. I don't even need to know that he plagiarized this, okay? Because you can kind of forgive some of these people for not catching the plagiarism. After all, only recently have we been able to use kind of computer scanning technology to go through all these databases and find where it matches. So I even forgive the committee or his advisors for not catching some of the citation problems. However, this should never have gotten anywhere, because from the beginning, this project is a bad project. And so if I were on this committee, I would have said, you need to either come up with a brand new project, because this one is really just dumb, or you need to reshape this so that it's way more scientifically rigorous and analytical and evaluative, because where it is right now, this is not nearly enough. If you want to earn a PhD, if you want to be considered a scholar in this field, you have to go way further than this. So, like I've been saying, I did that, I should say, in my freshman composition classes. I put my students through this level of rigor at that level. All right. How it wasn't done at the highest level is baffling to me. I'll get to that idea as I wrap up. But so just looking at this as a piece of writing and as a piece of scholarship, it doesn't work. And so again, I don't need to judge him. I don't need to play up some stereotype about race. I don't need to look at it as a condemnation of DEI. I don't even need to know that he made up his whole life story. Like, none of that matters. If I just look at this condemns much of the field of education, because this is what gets allowed passed through and granted a PhD and then promoted to the highest levels of academia. I mean, it's just madness. That the text itself is so bad and no one caught it. It's very, very strange. This goes to, look, education is really bad for this, and I'm going to talk more about problems in education on the next episode. But I just saw a chart with some data on it. I guess there had been a research study about some of the replication crisis that's been going on for a while in the social sciences, and education is included in it. And as you can see by the bar at the bottom, statistically 0% of education research is replicable in the classroom. Like, part of that is, kids are so different. It's very hard to replicate these studies, but also the original research is so shoddy that how do you even replicate it? This study is so bad, I don't even know where I would begin to replicate this study, right? Me replicating it would require me to do a completely different study. So this is bad in other fields too, as the chart demonstrates. Look, all of social sciences have this problem. But education, if it's to be lumped into social sciences, is the worst at this. All right, we just education is is just really bad at this. And like I said, I'm going to talk about that more next time. But one thing I did want to cover here is I started looking at some of his sources because I'd heard about the plagiarism stuff. So I was like, well, let me look for myself. And because I wanted to hear more about this idea of this mentoring stuff. And so I was just kind of randomly picking some sources. One source, as I was skimming it, was quite interesting because it is called, it's a book called Reflective Teaching and Learning. So it's about how to get students to analyze themselves, like do some self-reflection so that you can become a better teacher. It's like, okay, fine. I don't really fully agree with what they're discussing here, but I understand the premise. Well, there's a section early in the book as I was skimming and learning about this perspective. And it goes like this. Identity matters for teachers is the subheading, looking in the looking glass. The paragraph starts this way. Teaching is a public practice which bears some similarities with the process of acting. This is because teaching involves constant vigilance of the audience, with the teacher making regular efforts to imagine how he or she is coming across, and regular on-the-job evaluations of whether attempts at communication are being understood by students as intended. Okay, up to this point, I understand. Any human being has to do this, not just teachers. You should always be thinking, how am I coming across to my audience here? If I'm at my job, I'm in an office meeting and I am presenting something to my colleagues, I need to be thinking about how I'm presenting myself, how am I coming across? Am I making sure that that guy from that department understands, but also this guy from this other department? I need to be wondering how my boss is going to be interpreting what I'm describing. Anyone who has to communicate in any way, in personal life, professional life, teaching, we all do this all the time. So what they're saying here isn't exactly groundbreaking stuff, but it's the next part that caught my eye. This comparison with acting stresses the looking glass nature of teaching. It is one in which Cooley, as early as 1902, emphasized the essentially reflective nature of identity in his articulation of the looking glass self. You will find yourself reflected in a variety of mirrors, your colleagues, your learners, their parents, the government and media, all of whom provide multiple, often idealized images of teachers' professional identities. So I wonder if Mr. Arday took this idea to its extreme and started thinking, well, when I'm teaching a class, I'm already performing these identities. What if I performed a variety of identities all the time? And I can construct those identities any way I want. They don't have to be based in truth. They don't have to be facts about my background. After all, I'm playing a role here. It's all just acting. These images may compete frequently with your personal identity, may distort your self-image, and bring about a need for self-reflection. It is now recognized that identity in the workplace is not fixed and singular, but is multiple, changing and provisional in nature. Identity construction is always a social activity. It involves a continual constructing and reconstructing of relationships with others in the workplace. So again, it comes back to, yes, that is true. We're always kind of figuring out who we are based on our relationships with other people. Like, people give us feedback, which then shapes who we become. That's true. But again, this idea of acting really caught my eye because that's what appears Mr. Arday has been doing for many, many years now. He does a lot of acting. So just something to keep in mind that maybe the educational research he was reading got integrated into his life more than just or beyond just research for a project, but maybe he actually took it to heart. And that's why we now have the fantastical account of his personal life and all of his teaching, acumen and all this stuff, where we've seen many documents that have been reported recently where his bosses, his deans and the vice presidents were always like, this Jason Arday is a world-class scholar. He is one of the best teachers that we've ever seen. It's like, oh, that's how you present yourself as an actor, I guess. Something else that I want to just touch on briefly. I'm not going to get too heavy in this because I understand this is not something everyone else believes in specifically, but I do want to just share this interesting event that happened to me over the weekend. I was in church on Sunday, and we happened to have been studying a passage from 2 Timothy chapter 4. And as we're reading and the pastor's discussing it, I was like, oh, wow, what a coincidence that this idea is being covered today. And the preacher he didn't reference any of this. I'm sure it was, preachers plan things out many weeks or months in advance. So this was purely coincidental, but I thought, wow, how perfect for what I knew I was going to be talking about here this week. Where in Timothy, the second book of Timothy, Paul is writing about teaching, because both books of Timothy are really good for using scripture if you are going into the world of teaching, leadership in any field, but especially teaching, because that's what Paul has tasked Timothy to do, is go teach people about the gospel. And so there's lots of good stuff for teachers in here. But first of all, in verse 2, chapter 4, verse 2, preach the word. All right. He's very clear. Preach the word. Not how do you feel about the word? Not what is your race and gender intersectionality interpretation of the word? No. Preach the word. Preach the truth. All right. So even though we're talking about a Christian context here, we should be applying this to the academic world as well. Our job is to preach things that are truthful, not how we feel about them, not our wacky sociological interpretation of them, but what do we know that's truthful? Let's stick with that. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. All right, so this is what didn't happen to Jason Arday, that we all are supposed to be doing as teachers to all of our students. Correct them. When they're doing things that are wrong, you correct them. That's the job of the mentor. That's what can't happen among peers. They don't know enough to be able to correct. So we as the leaders, the teachers, have to be smart enough and willing to correct students when they get off track. He didn't receive any correction. No one told him, hey, this research project is not up to the quality we need, so you need to do something else. He wasn't corrected. Our job as teachers is to correct. Many times it's just to do the third thing. Well, we need to be encouraging. Yeah, of course we do. As he says, with great patience and careful instruction, obviously. But you can't forget the first two. When students are wrong, you need to point it out to them. Whether they're 8 years old or 20 years old, or they're working on their PhD and they're 30 years old. At all levels, someone smarter, more experienced needs to say, what you're doing there is not acceptable. It's not up to the level of competence. Maybe it's just flat out factually wrong, but there's something wrong here that you need to correct. So let's work on that. Rebuke sounds like a strong word, but sometimes we need to point out when things are not just accidentally wrong, not just factually wrong, but like, no, this is morally wrong. What you're doing here does not align with the values and the principles of what we're trying to accomplish. So we need to get back on track. Let's fix that. So it goes beyond just minor corrections. Sometimes there's a personal correction, like as someone wiser than you, let me guide you in a better path here, because what you're doing is not good. It's not good from a school standpoint, but it might not even be good from a personal standpoint. Like you're going down a bad path here. If you're going to lie about who you are, if you're going to, plagiarize, if you're going to manufacture research that isn't real, that's a problem. And that's bigger than just, I made a little mistake. There's a rebuke that needs to happen. Then also we encourage, we say, here's how I can help you fix this problem. All right, let's get on the right track, and then we'll try it again and see if it's better this time. But that never happens. For whatever reason, whether it's a DEI reason or problems with education, again, which is what I'm going to touch on next time, we're not doing the correction and rebuking. And it's all just, let's encourage, let's give them a second chance. Let's not count grammar. Let's give everybody, even if they didn't do anything, let's at least give them 50%. No, there needs to be correction. Sometimes there needs to be rebuke. And then we also encourage them on how to do it better. Well, that hasn't happened with Mr. Arday. Verse 3, for the time will come, and here's the key. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. So at some point you'll encounter people who don't really care about truth. They don't want to hear about reality. Instead, their itching ears, and that means like, I just want something to be entertaining. I want stuff that I like. Like, I don't want you to drone on about what I should be doing and what the right way and what the rules are and what's best for me and all this stuff. Like, I want stuff that I like. Give me some fun stuff. That's the itching ears. To suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. Well, what do they want to hear? Well, maybe it's the DEI stuff. Maybe it's stuff about just, flattery and pretending that we're all smarter than we are. Who knows what these people want? But that's clearly what allowed them to think it was a good idea to give this guy a PhD when he has no business earning a PhD from a scholarly standpoint. So that's the problem. Last verse, verse 4. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. They'd rather just believe the story. Oh, this guy had an amazing background. Oh, that sounds great. I want to give that guy more opportunities and promote him to be a professor at Cambridge. So I guess I'll let all these other things slide, like the truth. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn toward the myth. So this is a gentleman, Mr. Arday, who has achieved higher accomplishments than I ever have, what most professors and academics ever have. He's gotten acclaim. He's got a prestigious position that he had for a while. He succeeded. But how did he succeed? Well, the people around him, his advisors on his committee, didn't really care about the truth. Instead, they're like, tell me what I want to hear. Tell me a great story about how special you are. And if you do that, I'll pass you along and you'll achieve great things. So, interesting coincidence here that was part of the message that I heard in church the other day. I was like, oh, this matches exactly what goes on in the world of academia, where we don't pursue truth. We don't pursue scientific rigor. We don't pursue accuracy and clarity of communication. No, my ears don't want to hear that. My ears want to hear fun stuff. They want to hear a fabulous story. They want to hear about oppression so that we can all feel better about ourselves for overcoming things. All right. That's what you get. So this goes to a larger point that I'm going to go much deeper into on my next episode, which is education is particularly susceptible to this. And many fields are, other people have said, any field that ends in studies, you can guess what those might be. Sociology is awful. Even my field of English is really bad at this, okay, where it's not always very rigorous. There's a lot of bad things that get published that make no sense or really aren't valuable in any, again, doesn't have to be scientific way, but just, in demonstrating logic and truth. So it's, the problems are in a variety of places, but education is especially bad at this. And so I'm going to talk about that. Adam Carolla often says on his show, he talks about whenever things kind of go sideways, and it usually has to do with political stuff, but this applies to anything. He says, well, there's just a question. Was that person either stupid or a liar? Because that's all it was. Like, this wasn't an accident. The people who were part of this either acted stupidly or they were lying all the time. And I think that's what happens in the world of education. The DEI critics out there, that's the case they're making, which is, well, this guy made it because he was lying the whole time. And then all these people who worked with him and then propped him up and passed him in his doctoral work and gave him these promotions, well, they were lying too. They knew he wasn't a good enough scholar, or they didn't care that maybe some of his life story didn't quite match up. Just the idea of this guy being in that kind of prominent role is enough. It's good enough. Who cares about the scholar stuff? So there's the lying part. They're all just using this guy and he's using them, and they're all manipulating everybody for their own purposes. They're just liars. Or maybe another possibility is, again, that DEI argument is valid. And that's what other people have been saying. I'm going to go one step further and make an even more controversial claim and say it's also very likely that people in the world of education simply are not smart enough. So it's, again, as Adam Kroll says, you're either stupid or a liar. Well, it looks like they were lying. It's also possible that these people are stupid as well. It's quite possible that the person who sat on his committee read his work. First of all, I don't think they actually read it because it's 400 pages of nonsense. And if you would have read it, you would have caught all these problems. Anyone who's intelligent would have caught these problems. Like I said, I catch these for my students and they're 19. I expect my 19-year-olds to catch these problems. These are people who head academic education departments at major universities. If they can't catch these problems, yeah, they're stupid. They're dumb. They're not smart enough to even read this or to understand what a good research project is. And that is just as likely as the DEI manipulation stuff. So it could be either one. And I'm going to go further into that idea on the next episode where, yeah, there's a lot of liars out there. There's a lot of deceivers and manipulators in the world of academia who just do stuff to push an agenda, to get their ideology in front of these impressionable kids, to puff themselves up and make themselves appear to be more scholarly than they are. Could be that they're all just lying all the time. And that's an option. Could also be that they're actually quite stupid. And the field of education has a lot of stupid people in it. Trust me. So I'm going to dive into that idea more in a future episode. So be on the lookout for that. But like I said from the top, this is a problem that should have been noticed from the beginning without it ever becoming a DEI issue, without it ever getting to where we're diving into this guy's made up personal life, without it even getting to a point where we had to analyze the plagiarism. The premise of his project itself and the way it was written should have been alarm bells for everybody, especially the people on his committee who would have been reading this. Because if anyone would have just paid attention, you would have seen it. It's obvious. So I, in a masochistic way, dedicated my part of my weekend the other day to reading this abysmal dissertation. And again, I read a big chunk from the front of the book, and then a number of sections throughout the rest of the book. And it was enough. I understood what was happening there. And again, his advisor should have been able to tell immediately. I could tell on the first page, I was like, this is a problem. This should have never been accepted. From the first page, I could tell. And yet here we are. So hopefully that's an interesting look at his actual dissertation itself, rather than just all the DEI stuff that people have been talking about. But it's all related, and it's just a giant mess. But it's exposing a lot about the problems in academia. And then we look at why parents and students kids aren't going to college, or the parents aren't sending them to college as much anymore. Yeah, this is partly why. There's a million reasons why, but this is a big one. It doesn't look like it's very real anymore. Why? Because we don't have people who understand scholarship. And that's what the university always was meant to be. And yet, it looks like people are either lying or they're just not smart enough. So I'll talk about that more next time. Thanks for watching. See you next time.